Well, good evening. Come on, a little bit more enthusiasm than that. It's not so bad, right? We're talking about space tonight. So before I get into my talk, my mother used to tell me, there's 3 things you don't want to do when you're the last speaker of the night. Follow a really cute animal, follow a really talented artist, or follow really famous people like we had today. Weren't the talks this afternoon and this evening just wonderful? I had the chance to actually follow someone. I'll tell you a bit of a story offline since we were talking here tonight. About a week and a half ago, I was the speaker at the National Space Society 25th anniversary, and it was being held in the Smithsonian Institute, wonderful Air and Space Museum. And they asked me to go speak, and I said, fine, I'd be happy to do that. And then the producer came up to me and said, well, we'd like you to do something special. And I said, well, what is it? Well, it's the 50th anniversary of John Glenn's and Scott Carpenter's flight, and they're going to be coming, and we'd like you to come out and give them their awards. I said, that's a pretty big honor, and Scott lives in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I live, and it was a pretty nice thing to do. And a little while later, the producer came back to me and he said, well, we have a little change in the schedule. And I said, okay, well, what's that? He said, well, you're going to be the keynote, and you're going to be the last person talking before dinner, which is on the other side of the museum. And there's going to be 4 or 5 people before you. And I said, okay, well, that means I'll have about 3 minutes to talk because people hadn't been eating all night. It's fine. Then he came back a little bit later and said, we have a little slight other change. And I said, well, what would that be? He said, well, you are going to give the award to John Glenn, and he's going to be speaking, and then you're going to follow John Glenn. And I looked at him and I said, right. So John Glenn, on the 50th anniversary of his flight, is going to be talking in front of Friendship 7, the spaceship capsule that he had, which was sitting right off to the stage over here. And he's going to talk about his life and spaceship, and then I'm going to talk. Right, exactly. I said the same thing, yeah, right. And, well, that was fine, and I got a little bit nervous about that. And I said, well, what am I going to actually say? Then the producer comes around the corner while we're waiting in the speaker's room, and he said, come here. I said, no. He said, come here. I said, okay, well, what is it now? Is Neil Armstrong showing up? He said, no, we just want to let you know that John and Scott were talking, and this is probably going to be the last time that they're going to talk in public together. I said, great, so the last voice they're going to hear is mine. It was a wonderful evening, and both John Glenn was brought up in, I think, both of the speeches, and rightly so. He has been an amazing part of the history. But one of the things that isn't talked about, and I mentioned it at that evening, my favorite love story is John Glenn and his wife, Annie. And I will defy any of you, Nicholas Sparks could not write this story, Daniel Steele could not write this story. John Glenn and his wife, Annie, met in the crib when they were 2 years old. And their parents knew each other, and they put them in the same crib together. And they were holding hands at 2. They went through grammar school together as friends. They started dating in high school. They got married in 1943, and they're going to be married 70 years next April. Right. Amazing, isn't it? How many people do you know that have been together 88 years, and from when they were 2? And I was with John that evening, and his wife had knee surgery and couldn't fly. And he was calling her just before he got on stage, and you could tell that he missed her being in the audience. I said, all the space things that we talk about, life is really about passion and love. And I think what you hear about today and what you've heard about through space, one of the wonderful things about being in this industry is that you really get this sense of passion, and you get a lot of people like Pinky and Bonnie who looked up to the stars and said, I wanted to do something. And in my case, it's really no different. I came from a place that I fell in love with airplanes when I was a little boy. I started flying actually before I was driving. And I'll tell you all a secret story, somewhat of a secret story. I'm probably one of the only pilots that you'll ever meet who failed his driving test. Twice. The first time, I had my pilot's license, and I went to where I went. Our driving instructors were a little bit later than when you can fly at 16, and we got our license at 17 when we were driving. And the instructor failed me for the first time for going too fast. And I said to him, well, I'm a pilot. I was a crop duster, and I flew. And he said, well, I don't believe you. I'm going to fail you again for attitude. The second failure meant I had to wait 30 days before I could go back and take the test. So for 30 days, my family grilled me and made my life miserable, saying I could actually fly over the instructor, but I couldn't drive to the airport to go fly the airplane. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. And the reason I'm here tonight is a little bit about the future of space. My company and I believed I wanted to go to space and to do things that are in my view, just amazing opportunities to do something very special. And we are doing that. We're a fairly large growing company. We're about 2,200 people now. But importantly, we've been in space for about 25 years, and we've been on now 405 missions. And we're an American company, and we're very proud of that. And we'd like to continue to bring back space into America. We're launching something about every 3 weeks now. And we've done over 70 missions for NASA. And what we do is we build satellites, we build all the moving parts that go on really famous and important spacecraft, we build rocket motors, and we are building what is one of the potential replacements for the continuation and replacements for the shuttle going into space. And one of the fun things we get to do is to look back sometimes, and this is our 25th anniversary, and we have actually been to 7 planets, the moon and the sun, things that we've built, my company and all the people that work with us have built. So we look up at the stars and we look up at where we're going and say, you know, sometimes it's an amazing life where you can actually realize you come from a very small place like Bonnie did and I did, and you wind up doing things that are just amazing. One of the fun things is that sometimes I like to talk about how art imitates life and how life imitates art. And how many of you all know Wally? Come on, Wally, there we go. Wally's a wonderful character and was just an amazing character, but Wally didn't just spring out of somebody's imagination. Wally had a lead into the whole character and the design, and I fell in love with Wally. But Wally actually started, if you see this vehicle here, it's one of the 2 robotic spacecraft that are on Mars right now. It's called Spirit and Opportunity. And Wally, the people who put Wally together actually went and visited those of us who are building robotic spacecraft. And they said, we want to see how these things move. And we actually gave most of as you'll find out if you spend any time around space people, we're a little bit weird. And we like giving personalities to the things that we build or the things that we fly. And the 2 spacecraft, Spirit and Opportunity, are on Mars right now. They were supposed to have about a 6-month mission life and maybe a year on the outside. They've been there 8 years so far, and one of them is still working. And the producers from Wally came in and they said, we want to bring life to something that looks like what you guys are building. And if you could tell, there's a lot of similarities in Wally to the eyes and the way the eyes moved, and that's really a pretty fun thing. The vehicle you see up in here is even more of a fun activity. This is called the Mars Science Laboratory, or MSL. It was named in a contest, and it's now called Curiosity. And I love that name. Isn't that a great name for a robot going to Mars? What's great about Curiosity is that it is landing in about 5 weeks. It's been on a 340 million mile trip to Mars, 340 million miles. It launched in November, and it's going to get there in August of this year. And in August of this year, it's going to do some pretty special things. Curiosity is going to come in and land on Mars in a way that we've never landed something before. What you see here is a video of it approaching the Martian surface, and it will approach in a capsule-like object, which will then deploy a parachute, and out of the back of the parachute will drop the vehicle, which is underneath. It's sitting there. It will bring out its 6 wheels, and we're talking about a vehicle that's about the size of your car. It will then drop in a free fall using its own little jets to approach the surface of Mars. And when it gets to a distance above Mars, it's going to look down and it's going to say it's time to land. And then at that point, it's going to be lowered to the surface by virtue of what's called a sky crane. And eventually it's going to hit the surface, we hope very gently. And once it hits the surface, the vehicle that brought it there is going to fly off, find another place on Mars to go land itself. And then Curiosity is going to wake up. And it's going to look around, it's going to say, this doesn't look like Pasadena, which is what the last thing it saw before it took off. And it will stay on the surface of Mars, and much like Wally, will look around and find out that it's pretty much all alone. There are a couple of its cousins, but they're not going to be anywhere within reach. And eventually Curiosity then is going to spend at least a 2-year mission life on Mars. And what's different about this is that it is a laboratory. Unlike the previous vehicles we sent, it will actually do science. It will dig into the ground, it will look at things, and it will conduct the science on board itself and send back the information that's going to look for things like water and life on Mars. We do a lot of other fun things in our business. We are building rocket motors. Some of you may know a program called the Virgin Galactic Spaceship Two program. We're the rocket motor provider that is providing that system. But what's really fun about this motor is that it is made out of something that you would probably never think you would make a motor out of, and that is recycled rubber. Tires, old tires, that's the fuel. It's rubber, and the thing that makes it burn is something called nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas. It's what your dentist gives you. So we put laughing gas in rubber, and we use that to build a pretty good, solid rocket motor. Anybody watch Star Wars? Pretty good depiction. And again, life imitates art, and art imitates life. One of the really fun projects that we're doing, and really what we're here to sort of end the evening on, is the idea that we're building what we believe to be America's next spaceship, human spaceship. We call it the Dream Chaser. And you've heard many people tonight, and if you were here talking to people in space, you'll hear that word over and over again. It is a dream, and we live our dream, and we're so fortunate to be in the industry that allows us to do this. Our Dream Chaser is a very unique vehicle, and I like to talk about it. Anybody like spy stories or mysteries? Tom Clancy? Yeah. Well, we have a real life. Sometimes you wonder where these guys get their stories, but this vehicle actually started as a wonderful space spy story. In the late 70s, the Soviet Union at that time was building a vehicle. We didn't know this, but it was building a vehicle that was going to be a small space plane. And one day, an Australian spy plane was flying over the Pacific, and it flew over this ship, pulling something that looks like this out of the water. And the Australians didn't know what it was. They sent it to their defense force, and they didn't know what it was. They sent it over to the CIA. They didn't know what it was. They sent it to NASA. They didn't know what it was. And through this, somebody said, well, we don't know what it is, but we want one. So all this Soviet architecture, as you can see, looking like this, eventually became, this was a Soviet vehicle. NASA redesigned it from a handful of photographs and turned it into something called the HL-20, which was one of America's first lifting body vehicles. And it was meant originally to be the lifeboat for the space station. At one point in time, we were going to have 10 people on the space station, and we needed a vehicle to take those 10 people home. And this is the vehicle that was designed, and NASA worked on it for about 10 years, and then for a lot of reasons, the program was stopped, and we put it away. And about 8 years ago, we were thinking that at some point, the shuttle program was going to find its natural end, and there was going to be a need for America to go back to space with a vehicle that could be flown and maneuvered and do all the great things that you heard about this evening, maybe fixing things in space and doing servicing in space and maybe going up to the Hubble again. And we picked it up from NASA, and we began developing it. And our vehicle looks like this, but we talk in this museum about heritage quite a lot. And one of the things we have to do is recognize that what we do is just build on the great ideas of other people. Our destination is something called LEO, or low Earth orbit, and that's where our space station is. And one of the missions that we will be doing with this vehicle is taking people and cargo to the station and returning them. And a lot of people talk about the space station, and we talk about it in the sense of it is being most of what we see is an observatory right now, but it's really a laboratory. It's really meant to do things in space and do some really wonderful research. The problem is right now, there's no way to bring that research home. When the shuttle stopped flying, it also took away capability of returning crew and cargo. So we're going to launch this vehicle on something called an Atlas V, which is America's most popular rocket. And it goes up into orbit, much like the shuttle did, but we're on top of the rocket instead of on the side, and that was one of the many things we learned from the shuttle program. We can stay on orbit for a long time. We'll stay docked to the space station for up to 7 months if we need to. And we come home from the space station, and this is where things get a little fun for us. We return home from the space station in about 7 to 9 hours. We come back with less than 2 Gs of reentry force, which means it's very easy for the crew who's been up there for a long time, or for those experiments who have been up there, to come home and not get disturbed. We are either piloted or autonomous. We can come in either with a pilot or automatically on the spaceship's guidance systems, and we come and land on a runway. We can land on any runway, including SeaTac, which is sort of an interesting development in this program. What we are actually looking at doing is not limiting where we come home to. And we think that's a great thing, because we think America's space program ought to be brought out to America, not America come to the space program. And the idea of being able to fly home and land on a runway and maybe visit places like Seattle, because of all the people like you who have an interest in the space program, is really a wonderful thing for us. The other thing that's pretty interesting about our vehicle is that we're a green vehicle. We actually have no hazardous materials on board. And that means you can actually walk right up to the vehicle as soon as it stops and cools down a bit, and you can take things off. You're not restricted. This isn't rocket science in our minds. We actually have been building this vehicle now for the last number of years. We're involved in something called NASA's Commercial Crew Program, and we're one of the handful of companies who are developing vehicles for that program. It's probably my favorite picture that came out of the Shuttle program. These guys know it well. And the reason I love this picture is that you can't tell the people in this picture. You can't tell if they work for NASA, if they work for a contractor, what race they are, what creed they are, where they come from in the United States. It's a team, and we believe this very much to be a team effort. Our program actually has people from 29 states working on it, including a large contingent here in Washington State that are helping to build this program. And that's how we view things. It is a team. We have now 12 companies. We have 8 NASA centers and 4 universities who are part of this extended team of ours. And we believe, as you saw earlier, it's really about the future of our children as well. One of the great things we get to do is we employ a number of interns who came to school thinking that they were going to learn about space dynamics and aeronautics in the book, and they're actually working on building what might be America's next space vehicle. You can imagine how excited they are. So what is this going to look like? It's going to, we think, look pretty fun. And it's going to be a system that's going to be reusable. The Shuttle was an amazing system in my view, 135 flights, and it did its mission and it did what it was supposed to do. And in our view, we're just taking that whole legacy and all those wonderful things that have happened and moving them forward. And we'll be able to take astronauts and take crew to space and be able to do some, we hope, some amazing science as we go along doing that. I like to think of little brother and big brother. We've learned a lot, and this is actual size. We're about 1/17 the size of the Shuttle, but all those lessons, all that energy that came out of the Shuttle program is something that we feel and we believe has really been moved over to us. But it's really not just in theory. We actually started our flight test program here about 3 weeks ago. The vehicle you're seeing here is the first actual flight vehicle, and it was doing what was called a captive carry. And it was really fun because we got to do it in our hometown where the vehicle was assembled in Colorado. And as we did this, what continues to amaze me is how enthusiastic people are. We didn't publicize this. We didn't put this out on the internet that we were doing this. We were trying to do it semi-quietly. But then I realized, well, you're flying a spaceship over Denver. It's probably not going to be too quiet. Traffic stopped. People got out of their cars. And for the time that we were flying and for the whole day that the spaceship was on the runway, we had people lining up along the fences. We had kids jumping up and down, screaming. We've got probably 24 different pieces of art from children who were writing and drawing. And that's what this is really about. And that's what really I think this whole science festival is about. And it's an amazing thing that you're doing up here in Seattle to have this, is to be able to inspire the future of who we are and what we're about. That's how I was inspired as a little boy to start building things and looking toward the stars and dreaming that someday I might get to space and be able to help things get to space. And I know virtually everybody who's in the industry felt that way. And when you see something, and the reason I show this video as I'm ending here is that the thing that really drives people, I think, is to be able to dream something in your head and then see it turn into reality. And we were able to take this vehicle from the long history that it had from NASA and from the previous work done by the Russians, and be able to turn it into something that is now flying and starting its flight test, and hopefully very soon to be able to take people back to low Earth orbit and return them back home. So as I conclude here, I wanted to say thank you certainly to the sponsors and to the folks putting this together. This is a wonderful event, and it's really been my pleasure and my privilege to be up here to talk to you. And we called it the Dream Chaser for the reason, and I want you, as you drive home tonight, to believe that you can follow your dreams. You can go out and do things that are amazing. You can go out and push the boundaries. And all the speakers you heard tonight and the people that are part of this festival share one thing in common, and that is that we came from these places everywhere in the United States. We came not as people who have long histories in doing this, but people who have a dream and a passion. And that's what it's really about. So as I leave you, I want to say thank you for tonight, and as we close out the festival, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris. But it's been my pleasure to be here. Good night now.